Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Energy MD podcast, where we help you resolve your chronic fatigue, whether it's from chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID, so that you can get back to living your best life. As you've heard me speak before, I'm really focused on resolving the toxic five. So, this is a combination of heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction that I feel like is really at the root of everything. So I'm really excited because we're going to be talking with Dr. Tiffany Brown-Bush today all about some certain tools that she uses to help people fix their nervous system dysfunction. So let's learn a little bit about Dr. Tiffany. So Dr. Tiffany is a traditional naturopathic doctor, licensed neuropsychotherapist, and certified functional medicine clinician with 24 years of experience in wellness and healing. She specializes in ADHD, brain health, anxiety, dysregulated nervous systems, and reversing/preventing dementia. Dr. Tiffany developed the Doc Brown-Bush method, which uses the brain, body, and mind to promote healing. She is trained in emotional freedom techniques, safe and sound protocol, internal family systems, brain spotting, functional neurology, recode for Alzheimer's, naturopathy, and advanced functional medicine. Wow. Clients often seek her out as a natural alternative to psychiatry and medication. Tiffany, thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and making your way through my bio.
You're very impressive. What can I say?
Thank you.
So nervous system dysfunction, trauma, is one of the things that we kind of touch on, and it sounds like it's a big part of the work that you do. Can you, I guess maybe we'll start a little bit with your story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made your way to really specializing in the psychiatric issues?
Yes, that's a great place to start. It started for me personally. I always was in love with self-help and psychology and all the things, and decided to pursue a career in mental health. And as I started to navigate my own health journey with Lyme and all of the things that, mycotoxin illness and mercury illness, all the things, I had to double back and start to get some sort of mastery of naturopathic medicine and functional medicine. And I started to learn over time that all of these things needed to be blended if I was going to actually recover, and then realized that I was surrounded by people who also needed the same sort of interventions, who hadn't pieced it all together. They were maybe working in a silo of some sort. They were doing all the supplements, or they were doing talk therapy to no end, or they were, working on it, changing their diet over and over again. Just piecemealing things. So I realized I wasn't the only one who ended up on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then you mentioned talk therapy. And so a lot of people go for talk therapy. Why doesn't talk therapy always work?
That another great question. Oftentimes in the old way of doing things, there were two things that were going on. One, there was a lot of cognitive restructuring work. So you're really staying in the head and not dropping into the body, where all of this is happening. As someone who navigated Bartonella and navigated mercury issues and all the things, there was a lot happening beneath the head. And we were dropping into the body in talk therapy. And then the other piece of it was with a lot of the psychoanalytic, we were going back and looking at a lot of different things, but not teaching people how to feel their body, notice their nervous system, and so forth and so on. So there was just a lot of pathologizing symptoms that were actually nervous system related. The system was having an appropriate reaction to feeling like attacked by something you couldn't see, and here we are giving people a diagnosis and giving them medication and not honoring their real experience. So people were sitting in their head, or they were being pathologized and actually kind of disembodied. So I think that's where it went kind of awry for a long time.
Okay. And so then what's the approach that you found to be most helpful?
So over the years, through trial and error, through amazing teachers. I had the opportunity to be in the room with Dr. Neil Nathan saying that if you do not do something to stabilize the nervous system, doesn't matter what you do, they won't get healthy. They won't heal. And I just started to realize that, yes, functional medicine is amazing, and getting back to true functioning makes a lot of sense. And talking and processing is important. But you also have to understand how the nervous system and the brain play into that, understand the brain stem, understand the cerebellum, understand how the brain lobes work together. So I took a process that I made my own, which is that method that you mentioned, which is brain, body, mind. And so when people come to me, they understand it's going to be probably a strange experience for them, but it's going to be looking at all areas as they're healing at the same time. And not overwhelming. We'll start with one stage at a time, but once it gets going, we're looking at all systems.
Excellent. I oftentimes tell the people in my program that we don't know if your nervous system dysfunction is 90% of the issue or 10%, right? And I have seen people have really significant improvement. And it sounds like you had Lyme and mycotoxin illness and mercury. And were you able to resolve it mainly by doing nervous system retraining and these other techniques that you've cultivated?
Absolutely not. No. I had to do all of it. I really did. I had to do all of it. And so that's a great question because you never know. And so one of the things I do, I think it's really important to just drop into this for a second, is I make sure I take an assessment of adverse childhood experiences with all clients, patients, looking at their history. Because unbeknownst to me in my journey, that's what set me up to be extremely vulnerable to not being able to resolve these the way that my husband was, who was in a similar environment, who had an idyllic childhood. I always tease him. His mom was Joan Cleaver. So everything was very easy and positive. So he got mycotoxin exposure, no problem. He didn't have the genetic predisposition to have problems with it, but he also didn't have the being bathed in cortisol experience that I did as someone who came from a pretty traumatic background.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-verbal trauma. I had problems in the womb. I had problems once I got out into the world. And so by the time you start actually having encounters with these different things in the environment, you're not as resilient. You're supposed to bend and not break. But some of us break. Some of us, seemingly break in the face of that. So, what got me over the hump absolutely was doing safe and sound protocol repeatedly, for sure. But I mean, the herbals did an amazing job. The biological dentist did an amazing job. The detox supplements and all the sauna, all of that was very, very, very important in my journey, the dietary change. So I really do believe, I got a great foothold with the supplements that I used and the lifestyle changes, but sleep and nervous system work and higher power work, all of that's what got me my life back, because I really thought I was going to be out on disability indefinitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that a lot with folks where it's always a combination. Everything has to be addressed. But I tell people also, you can remove the toxins off of the nervous system, but the nervous system may still be dysfunctional, right? And so then you have to go in and you have to do this work. So you talked about getting the ACEs test, the adverse childhood events, on everybody. But doesn't everybody have some nervous system dysfunction?
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I do. I think there's once you get sick, especially, the system is going to upregulate, right? And it can get stuck. That's our challenge. Like that vagal brake, that vagal tone gets off and you're just kind of stuck in sympathetic, or in my case, in my practice, I get a lot of people who come in depressed, right? So they're stuck in dorsal vagal. They just kind of flattened out. And so we're not flexing anymore. And I think that can happen to almost anyone for sure, given the right circumstances. I know you see this in your practice. You'll have, two people in the same household and a lot of times he is super resilient, and yeah, and he's like, I don't know what the problem is.
Right.
This the house is full of mold, and he's going to work and conquering the world, and she can't get out of bed.
Right.
And so I do think there are differences. I get a lot of course, because I have a mental health practice, I get a lot of women with trauma as part of their history, head injuries and trauma, goodness
Mhm.
gracious, as part of their history, so you're adding insult to injury. And so I will get really sick women who just cannot function, can't get out the bed, can't care for themselves or their child, kind of things. And I do find that can track with a history of pretty dramatic trauma, but I honor that it's not always that case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of the people in my program are also women, between the
Yeah.
age of 50 and 70. And, some of it is, women are more likely to ask for help, but they are also more susceptible. I have a chapter in my book, actually, which is why husbands don't believe their wives when it comes to mold.
Mm,
Exactly what you were talking about. Like,
yes.
I think there's something about the XX or the XY has some, I mean, we don't know. There are definitely some genes at play in addition to, the environment.
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly it.
Yeah.
And just honoring that, and the female brain is, well, way more complicated. Dr. Amen is known to say that, like, it's like a two-way highway with men, and women. It's like the interstate in LA. It's like it's expressway. It's just like we're doing so much, and so we are way more likely to be sensitive as well
Mhm.
and crash. So I just think there's such a vulnerability, and I try to explain that to families too. And you can see it with, you have a woman in a household and she's doing 12 things at once, right? And
Right.
so the burnout is there, and the husband's like, I got one thought going and I'm good with that one thought. Like, things are pretty simple in there, and I think that adds to the resilience as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would definitely
Mhm.
agree with that. My wife and I have had conversations about it where, we're just coming from different places, and I just got one thought, thinking about one thing, and she's managing a whole bunch of things, and yeah, I can't
Yeah.
even imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, and I don't think it's helpful. I
Uh-huh.
just don't think in this healing journey. And I love that Dr. Amen at the Amen Clinic talks about this, and just has reverence for the female brain. Just that complexity contributes to the depression and the anxiety and the vulnerability, and just honoring that that's the case, and simplifying as the female brain goes into perimenopause and menopause. And see, I'm thinking about your age group, your age range. She's now kind of going from that juggling everything, and the estrogen's dropping out and all of that thing. She's the resilience has been impacted, right? And her brain is trying to reconcile where she's been and where she's going. And it's just a very interesting time for women.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of terminology, do you like the term nervous system dysfunction, or do you have a preference for like what's happening with these people?
Yeah, I tend to tell them that it's a dysregulation, but that also comes with the space that I'm operating in with psychology. It's a dysregulated emotional state. So I tend to explain neurological dysregulation as well as just nervous system dysregulation. Same idea though.
Okay, so we've kind of established that this is a main component of illness for so many people, and especially people in our community who are watching this and listening to this today. So then tell us a little bit about your method on how you work with this.
Yeah, yeah. So, and like you heard me say in my own journey, I definitely think functional medicine matters. I think I don't want to underestimate the value of gut health and nutrition, and making sure you're doing the right, meal plan for you and eating the right ways for you, and circadian rhythm. All of those things matter, right? But what I will often find is that when people come to me, they may have a history of head injuries. They underestimate how dramatically that can impact things. So I want to just take a beat and just speak to that, because the brain hitting the head, hurting the brain is part of the nervous system. And that's a big piece of this. And so often people have had car accidents, they've fallen and hit their head and just not thinking anything of it. And that will start to manifest somewhere between 5 to 10 years later. And so just from a brain perspective of looking at, okay, just what's going on with the brain stem, which is at the base of the skull, and the cerebellum, which is at the back of the brain, the two sides of it. You know, if you've got an injury to that area, the cerebellum, you're going to have issues with firing into the rest of the brain lobes. So one of the areas that I'm screening for always is just like, what is actually going on with your brain? Have you hit your head? Where did you hit it? Can I do basic in-office cerebellar testing with you? Are you misfiring? Because you're misfiring into all those brain lobes if the back of your brain is unhappy. The cerebellum is 80% responsible for the rest of the brain. 80% responsible. Yes. So many people come in and they think they have like ADHD all of a sudden or something like that. And it's really like there's an injury, a food sensitivity. You have gluten issues going on with the cerebellum, and it's misfiring into the rest of the brain, activating gear shifting in the brain, activating anxiety in the brain. So I always ask people to just kind of look back over their history. Did they have a concussion? Did they hit their head but think nothing of it? You know, did they have a car accident? Are they an ex-football player? Did they get their bell rung? You know, like how many times did that happen? And a lot of times that is playing into, now you've got some sort of environmental illness variable that we're dealing with. So there's that. And I also want to speak to, I do a lot of looking at the brain stem and trying to see if primitive reflexes have come back, because that's another thing that will fire into the brain and have the brain itself actually dysregulated. Primitive reflexes are in the brain stem, and due to illness, trauma, some sort of injury, they can reactivate. And a lot of times you've got people struggling because they've got this primitive reflex that needs to be reintegrated. So part of my method is literally teaching people how to balance their brain before we get to vagus nerve, and we're you know, doing all these super sophisticated things like brain spotting or the safe and sound protocol. Just, can you do some exercises to make your brain calmer, right? And I tend to find post-COVID, post-head injury, post-divorce, there are a lot of reactivated primitive reflexes in the brainstem. Dr. Melillo talks about this a lot, and I've been trained in functional neurology pretty aggressively. And so it's one of the things I learned I had to look for with a lot of people, especially people being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. In that population, these primitive reflexes have reactivated. So it's part of how I get the brain to synchronize again and to fire properly, just calming that down.
And what does it look like? Can you give us kind of an example of a technique potentially?
Yes, absolutely. So the palmar grasp, if you think about to your child, so everyone go back to when your baby was first, born, and you're putting your finger inside your child's hand, and they're always going to close their hand around their finger. And it's like, oh, that's so cute. It's a reflex. That's the palmar grasp reflex. That is not supposed to be activated. And one of the things we do to test for that, and sometimes, especially when I was working more in pediatrics, is that would be active a lot of times with my kids with neurodivergency. That was just part of what was going on, is their brain was misfiring because that hadn't integrated properly. But what we've learned is that with adults in illness, that's reactivated. Or the startle response, which I bet is a really big one in your population. And that's a Moreau. And when with a baby, what you'll notice is that they have this kind of startle reaction, right? Because they haven't integrated, they don't have the prefrontal cortex. They're trying to build their cerebellum. There's a lot going on. So they just have these reflexes. A lot of times when women come into my office with all these chronic illness, fatigue, and pain issues, they have these just hairpin startle responses, like I can't make any noise, and I test it. And some of these women just want to jump through the roof. They're so on edge. And so once I test for that, we actually reintegrate it. So there are exercises to reintegrate these primitive reflexes. Yes, I don't test anything I can't fix. So there's all these different things you can do to reintegrate. And I had a woman in last week, and I could tell that she was on edge, and I knew she was going to hate the Moreau test. And I tested her. It was very big reaction, and I had her start reintegrating and doing the exercise in office. And she said, it just feels so good just to do this, right? And that's a hemisphere connection. You're connecting both hemispheres of the brain. You're going across the corpus callosum, the midline of the body. And she was calming herself. It immediately felt good to her. So I give people these things, because this is functional neurology. It's free. It's just the time commitment. It's 15 reps a couple times a day, and it can really make a massive difference. And here's the thing, as you're adding in all of the functional medicine work, you're balancing the brain, balancing the nervous system, just like our body is designed to, right? You're wiring in these things. So I do find that it drives the process faster. That's one big piece. So for me, when I look at nervous system dysregulation, I really want to start with just like, what's going on here? How is this functioning? Because there's so much executive function issue and so many memory problems. And it turns out there's a lot that needs to happen. If you put someone on one foot and try to get them to balance, and goodness, if you ask them to close their eyes and test their vestibular system, they're immediately falling over. Well, of course they've got problems. Of course they feel dysregulated. Their whole vestibular system is misfiring, right? So then we start to retrain that. And so that's first pathway for me into this next piece of like more sophisticated nervous system support.
So is that the brain, body, mind?
That's a big piece of it. People will come in and it's like, I can do the functional medicine. Oh, that part's easy. I need to get you to test. You come in for a brain health assessment. Let me just check out your brain. And I put them on the interactive metronome testing system as well. That's a big piece of it. And I test brain timing. And you just find that there's so much actually going on neurologically for people. And so if you change their body and mind as you're kind of rebalancing their brain, that just drives the process faster. And then we'll do vagus tone, and we'll do all the other things for nervous system, but I will layer it. So I'll start with those three things, brain, body, mind. And then the next phase is always that nervous system. Like, do we need to go into brain spotting? Do we need to do safe and sound protocol? But I need a strong foundation. And people will do that with me and feel like they're 50% better. They're just, they'll go away sometimes. they'll do that. And like 4 to 5 months in, they're just like, yeah, I'm good. And I don't want to test it. It's like, leave me alone. Don't do anything else to me. And we don't always even go into the more sophisticated stuff because a lot of people are really post-concussed and not properly kind of rebalanced as a result.
Okay. And so you were dealing with the things you were just talking about. That was the brain, body, and mind.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what's the difference between each of those? I wasn't tracking all that.
Oh, good. No, that's a great question. And so, and I think too, I don't think I dropped into the mind piece as much. So I think that's where I lost you. So the functional medicine is going to be the body piece and, sleep and nutrition and all of those things. So we will do that. I will often, if someone comes to me, the first thing I'll do is their blood work and I'll do their brain health assessment, which is what I was just describing. And so that gets me, looking into what's going on physically and then what's going on with the brain, right? And then we'll start working on giving them things to do on those two domains. When it comes to looking at mind, a lot of that is just what have you done psychologically? If this is somebody who's coming to see me and someone you would see in your practice, they may have been chronically ill, chronically fatigued for a long time. losing bits and pieces of their experience in their life and feeling more and more detached from things. And so I'll look to see, well, what have you done psychologically? And then that's where I'll drop into more of IFS work, parts work with people, and really look at what's happening there. And IFS is internal family systems, and it's a type of psychological approach. It's a whole framework that believes, just like with what we do with functional medicine, tapping into the healing potential of the body, that the healing potential of the mind has just been blocked, and we need to unburden and get space from the things that are blocking the healing potential of the mind. And that's that mind piece of things.
Very cool. And what does that look like so that people can get a sense of whether that's something they want to pursue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So internal family systems is going to look like just, and it's so different from a traditional therapy appointment. It's going to be just getting into understanding managers and the firefighters and self. So that's the framework. So I'll do some light psychoeducation with people, explaining that managers are the striving parts in the system. They're a protector in the system. Those are our hardworking parts that kind of get us burnt out. Firefighters are the parts of us that will come forth in our system and have us using coping mechanisms that, society would deem as vices and maybe overuse behaviors that could cause problems. Exiles are going to be parts of the system that feel a lot of tenderness and pain. So when we start talking about that ACEs assessment, that adverse childhood experiences, trauma from the past, or feeling worthless or feeling inadequate or unloved, those are exiles in the system. Those are deep pains in the system. And working with that can absolutely help to balance the mind, right? So unburdening there and getting healing there helps a lot with the body getting into healing. And so I teach people about their protectors. So they're managers, they're firefighters, they're exiles. And what you're trying to do is be self-led. And self has healing capacity to work with all these different parts in the system. But a session just sounds like, oh, okay, I'm hearing that your anxious part was kind of driving the bus today. Let's talk to that part of you, or let's hear from that part of you. What had it triggered? What had it activated? Can we get it to peel back a little bit so that we can work with it? So it's not on you, but it's with you. You're trying to be with a part instead of in the anxious part or in the striving part or in the hypervigilant part, because that shows up in the community a lot.
So is it helpful to kind of separate it from the self and have it as like a third party? Does that detachment kind of help in some way?
That's a fantastic question. I think what happens a lot of times, even with, like diagnoses, is like you're diagnosed as anxious, or you're diagnosed as depressed, or you're diagnosed as unwell, right? And so if we can start to get that space and realize, no, you're whole and healthy and resilient, and you've gotten like lost, like that center of you has gotten lost. That part of you that's connected to nature, that's connected to your higher power, like that's just gotten buried by anxiety and overwork and all those things. Then you're able to get some space and work with it better.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
And we will literally talk to parts in a session. I will talk to a part directly and ask, can I work with that part directly? Critics in this community, a lot of times there's a pretty harsh inner critic in this population. There's a perfectionist part in this population a lot, and just getting all of these parts to, step back and let us get into that healing. That is a massive piece of it. And I'm just going to add here, when I get people who have seen everyone, like all of the greats in the space, and they can't get well, and they've got the best care and the best supplements, and they've done therapy, and it's almost always that the parts work, and then working with the nervous system even more deeply, like the safe and sound protocol and changing safety cues. Those two things really are what people I find need when they're stuck. They need to work with the part. They need to work with a number of parts. I've seen beautiful shifts happen for people that just were stuck in fibro for forever and nothing was helping. And that's why they were stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Safe and Sound protocol?
Yeah, so Safe and Sound is Dr. Stephen Porges. That is based on the polyvagal theory of looking at the nervous system and being in ventral vagal is the relational iteration of where the nervous system should be, or rest and digest, parasympathetic. Those are the different names for what we're shooting for, right? And Porges says that what happens is we're getting stuck, like the brake's not working. So we're in sympathetic dominance, which is, fight, flight, or we've crashed, right? And we're in dorsal vagal. And so I won't get into the Dr. Stephen Porges story, but it's a fascinating story. And, look into how he got here, because he was definitely not starting in trauma work and helping people rewire their nervous system. But he realized that what was happening is the nervous system no longer felt safe. And that eye contact and tone of voice and connection and working with sound could go in and rewire and repattern the nervous system. So Safe and Sound protocol is a listening system.
Oh.
That is it's administered by a provider who's been trained in the method. And we have to roll it out over a minimum of 5 days. Some of the practitioners do it for a month in teeny tiny 15-minute or 10-minute. Yeah. Because some people are so sensitive and so dysregulated. I can do it in 5 days. I haven't ever had to break it down to that short a period. That's a very long time to be like meeting and working together, but you're working together with the music and working to calm the system down. And it's really an amazing experience. And I had to do it 3 times to help my startle response and my nervous system, because I was getting the Bartonella had me so activated. I was in such an alarm state. Once it was cleared, you couldn't make any noises around me. You couldn't drop a pan or anything. Like, I just would come out of my skin. And Safe and Sound helped me to feel safe again in my environment. That was a big piece for me.
Brilliant. So you had that experience and then you decided to get certified or trained in it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to unknow these things.
Right.
It's like, well, this is what it takes, because you're pathologizing. Oh, I'm just anxious. I'm not that anxious. I'm a little anxious, but this is unreasonable. Like, I was startling at everything. Right. And it was because of the infections. It was because of the toxicity. I had gotten stuck in sympathetic. And I was, angry and irritable and activated. When they did the SPECT scan on my brain, when I first got diagnosed, I was super flooded. I had the ring of fire, is the one that Dr. Amen talks about at the Amen clinics. My brain was so activated on the SPECT scan. And I had been treated for a lot of things at that point. And they were like, what is going on with you? And so we could see it on the SPECT scan. And after the 3 iterations of SSP, I was no longer in ring of fire. So that for me was what I needed as confirmation that this was the right direction to go with people. Like, I have a pretty deep toolbox, so we don't go to SSP right out the gate, right? If we can do something that's not as involved and just do my basic brain, body, mind and do some parts work, great. But if someone just had years of chronic activation and they were, they grew up in an abusive household, and so their nervous system has just been dysregulated for a while, and this was just the straw that broke the camel's back, then okay, we're hitting SSP. And then I've done it in so many different scenarios where it's just been kind of jaw dropping, like 6 weeks out from SSP, the difference in just how people are encountering their environments.
Brilliant. Have you ever
Yeah.
seen the parts work or the SSP not work? And why do you think it didn't work?
Yes. That is a great question. Let's see. Parts work is a great go-to. So I haven't seen it not work. So it's people love it. They love going inside. It's almost meditative. They love it. Especially people who are in their head and thinking a lot and striving and figuring out life. They like the experiential quality of it. So then, because it has self healing capacity, it always shifts something. I haven't seen parts work not be impactful. I have found that SSP brought out too early doesn't work. And that's why I launched into let me just get the brain itself balanced. SSP comes in like at that 8-month mark for me of treatment. I don't bring it in early in treatment. It's expensive, it's time consuming, you know what I mean? And it's a big gun. I needed a big gun for my own personal healing. I was pretty Bartonella was a real monster for me. And then I was super toxic and the whole thing. So I needed a lot of support. But so that's what I have found is SSP too early is a no-go. So, and they probably wouldn't love me saying that, but that has been my clinical observation is later. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, I appreciate your transparency, your honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so impressed with everything that you're doing. I love the fact that you're combining everything. I love the different tools that you've cultivated. It's really remarkable, the
Ah,
work that you're doing.
thank
So
you.
so what does it look like for people who want to work with you? Are you just in person? Are you also online? What are you doing these days?
Yeah. I'm a hybrid. So I am in office a couple of times a week, and people will travel in sometimes for if they really want to have the brain health assessment and just do all the things, but they can work with me virtually. Parts work is something that you can do in a kind of a coaching way in different states and different countries. So I'm able to do parts work coaching with people to calm down their system. And so I'm able to work with people virtually as well. And 2 days a week, that's what I do.
Very cool. And where are you located?
I'm in Cornelius, North Carolina.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
So,
nice lake community. So it's a nice place to come visit.
nice. And so where can people find you online?
Yes, I am at docbrownbush.com. So if you just put in Doc Brownbush, I'm luckily the only one. And same thing on Instagram and Facebook. And I have a little podcast, a private podcast where I just go on and on and on about my thoughts, so they can check out some of my different podcasts as well. So that's Integrative Mental Health Therapy with Dr. Brownbush.
Excellent. And then we also have a free gift. Want to learn how to handle your perimenopause and ADHD symptoms, the Perimenopausal and ADHD Survival Guide.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool. And then there was, let's see, looks like there was also, oh no, that's nothing. Okay, good. Yeah, so we'll drop those. And do you still have that intensive?
Yes. So what you're thinking about is I do a number of different intensives. Sometimes, people need to get the work done very quickly and intensely. So the SSP intensive is a 5-day intensive where we're blending parts work and SSP at the same time. And then for people who are like, oh, I just really need to work with my critic part or my perfectionist part, I'll do a couple of days intensive work, and I can do those virtually with people to just kind of help get them unblended from those parts that are kind of activating their nervous system.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me today, for educating me, for educating our tribe, our audience here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So if you have chronic fatigue, whether it's from long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, go ahead and click the link below to watch my latest masterclass, where I go deep into our 4-step process that has helped thousands of others resolve their symptoms naturally. After you watch that video, If you're interested in seeing if we're a good fit to work together, you can then get on a free call with me. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you over there. I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have is one of my absolute favorite things to do. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Thanks for listening and have an amazing day.